Leah Cheshire of NASA Communications, and I am joined by Matt Dominic, commander of the Crew 8 mission to the International Space Station. He just got back, what was it, 3 or 4 months ago now?
Yeah, October last year.
Okay, well, we are hosting our first live Twitch stream from space today. As you know, we have hosted a lot of other events here on Twitch, anything from spacewalks to any of our planetary missions, but this one is specifically meant for the Twitch audience. So we're really excited that everyone has joined us today. So one of our big portions of today's show is going to be talking to NASA astronaut Don Pettit, who is currently living aboard the International Space Station. Don was selected as an astronaut in 1996, and he has previously spent about a year in space on expeditions 30 and 31, and he is now on expedition 72. He is a flight engineer right now. He's working on a lot of science and research that we're going to talk about, but you've probably also seen some of his really beautiful astrophotography from the space station. We're going to talk a little bit more about that too, and if you haven't seen it yet, you need to go check him out on X. And you can also find some of his stuff on the NASA account or the NASA Astronauts account as well. So, like I was mentioning, I am joined today by NASA astronaut Matt Dominic. Came back from the Crew 8 mission, which was his first mission to the International Space Station. So, Matt, tell us a little bit about yourself and about your mission.
Awesome. I've been with NASA since 2017, joined with a class called the Turtles. And man, it's been quite a journey working on various programs. It's an incredible time to be in spaceflight. We have so many rockets and spaceships that we're getting ready to go to the moon or going to, we've been going to the International Space Station for over 20 years now. And then got to do that mission and got to fly with Don, who we'll talk to later today. But flying with Don was a treat for a lot of reasons. He was my mentor in the office before I flew. So when we join the astronaut corps, we get a mentor. And so Don was my assigned mentor, and we have very different backgrounds, right? Don is a PhD, a scientist, an engineer. I'm background from the Navy, flying airplanes and doing flight tests, but we both share a common love of taking pictures and doing backyard science. So going to the space station and doing the space station science we have, but also doing a few experiments on board of our own and demos was quite a blast.
Yeah, and I want to dive into those for sure. So before we do, I want to talk a little bit about, well, if you heard some communications just there, that is our space-to-ground communications. Yep. So that is live audio from the International Space Station coming down here to Houston, Texas, which is where we are at NASA's Johnson Space Center. And we'll hear a little bit more about that in about, let's see, less than 10 minutes now, because we are getting ready to talk to Don. But let's talk about the space station as a whole. So what is the International Space Station? If you're not aware, the International Space Station is an orbiting laboratory, essentially. It's huge. If you put it on top of a football field, it would reach from end zone to end zone of the truss section. And this fall, we will celebrate 25 years of people living continuously in space.
That's crazy to think about. I think about that a lot when I go talk to elementary schools, or now even high schools and colleges, right? There are people taking classes in college right now that have never known a world where there wasn't a human in space.
Yeah.
Like, think about that number for a while. So 24-year-olds in, just don't know a world where we haven't had people in space.
Right. So the International Space Station is flying about 250 statute miles above our heads at any time, essentially, on an Earth orbit. And it travels about 17,500 miles per hour. So to put that into perspective, about 5 miles a second, which is orbital velocity.
Yep.
And we control the International Space Station from here at Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. So if you have seen Mission Control in the movies, it's kind of based off of this place. This is where we have Mission Control. This is where we have our flight directors, our flight controllers. This is where we train the astronauts. So all of our astronauts move here and start their training process once they are selected and assigned to a mission.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you mentioned earlier just the speed of space station, and we always throw that number out, 17,500 miles an hour. But being able to live on the space station or go to space in a rocket, you kind of get a sense for the speeds and the scale of the world we live in, right? The space station is 250 miles away. The moon is about 250,000 miles away, so 1,000 times further. But the speeds just kind of hit you, right? I remember, I'd received some advice a long time ago in my life to kind of take mental pictures when you're going to go do cool things in life. So, hey, before the birth of my my 2 children, right? Like, I have mental pictures of being in the delivery room, but I also have, mental pictures of the day I got married, mental images of of some of those moments from space, and I have a lot of them, but one of them that really struck me was just the speeds that we're going and the time at which it takes to get around the Earth. So a couple of those are, hey, there's a hurricane right out there in front of us, and we have a camera, and we need to take a picture of a hurricane. Hurricanes are just massive in terms of scale and size, but I only had a couple minutes to take a picture of it. Just and at one point I had a camera failure, and just being able to take a picture and have to swap batteries or swap things on the camera. I only had about 30 seconds of just being right over the top to take a good picture. Yeah. The speed at which you're going. Or one of the other memories I have is we're strapped into the Dragon, you're sitting on your back, we're getting ready to come home, see my family and friends for the first time in 8 months, and we're screaming over Australia. And I think like 7,700 meters per second. And we're gonna go from that speed to 0 in 34 minutes. So we were over Australia, and then we were down in the body of water we used to call Gulf of Mexico, now Gulf of America, in like 34 minutes. That's insane.
From being in space.
Yeah, so we were in space going ludicrous speed, 17,500 miles an hour, to 0, hanging under parachutes, splashing down in the water. So this thing is a spaceship, right? Yeah. And then it's going through the atmosphere and it's turning, right? So I have a small model here. When you come back to Earth, there's just the trunk. This comes off, but you have your little capsule here. And your capsule has a center of mass, and it has a lifting point. And that lifting point is center of lift, it's the same as an airplane. We're able to roll the spacecraft and maneuver that center of lift relative to the center of mass and guide the aircraft back to Earth through the atmosphere like an airplane. So you're a spaceship, you're an airplane, and then you're in the water, you're a boat. So pretty impressive little vehicle, how we travel to space. But the scale, the speeds, incredible to think about.
I want to back up a little bit to the space station too.
I threw a lot at you, Leo. We went very fast, but that's the only speed I got.
It was a lot. You're already home from your trip now. You've already splashed down. You've shown us. So
yes,
we are also going to talk about the space station, which is where Dawn is living. And what the space station really unlocks for us are these research opportunities that we don't have on Earth, because the International Space Station is, like I mentioned earlier, an orbiting laboratory, and it removes what hinders a lot of research on Earth, which is gravity. And so you guys have done a ton of experiments. I mean, I think we've done over 4,000 experiments over the lifetime of the International Space Station. We're talking everything from material science to combustion science, understanding how the human body works in space, because when you look at the human body in space, I know that there are a lot of changes that happen pretty rapidly that we associate here on Earth with aging. You know, the strength of your bones or your muscles can change while you're in space because you're not using them. I mean, we're using our muscles right now. It may not feel like it, but just to sit up straight, you're using them, and you don't there. And so being able to study that on the International Space Station also helps us here on Earth better understand, you know, how the aging process works, things that we can do to help mitigate that too.
Absolutely. So there was a discussion that occurred before the space station, before the International Space Station, about where do we go next? Like, what do we do next? Right? We had Apollo, right? We went to the moon, and there was a discussion about building the space station. We had done a couple of small space stations, right, with Mir in Russia, and then Skylab in the United States. And we were having a discussion: do we go build a space station, or do we go to Mars? Like, that was a legit conversation happening at the highest levels of our government. And we didn't know a lot, but we ultimately ended up, there was a legit discussion: do we go to Mars? 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago. And the discussion was made: hey, let's go to the space station. And there were some folks that were really adamant, like, hey, no, we're ready, let's go to Mars. And what we've learned after putting people in orbit for 25 years is, man, we would have been in trouble. The number of people, so when you talk about experiments, you talk about N, which is your sample size, how many people, right? Or how many experiment times you're gonna do that experiment. And so we now have 25 years of sending hundreds of people to the space station, and we've learned a lot. We found about things that happen to your body that if we had gone on a 2-year mission to Mars, we'd have been in trouble, right? Yeah. Things that happen to your eyes, your bone density, your heart, that if we've been putting people in 0G for that long, we've been in trouble. So we're super glad we went, and we keep learning more every day.
Yeah, it really prepares us for our future long-duration missions. Yeah. And we call it a lot a test bed, getting ready for trips to the moon and to Mars.
Yeah.
So coming up next, we are getting ready for our conversation with Dawn. So some of the things that you'll hear, you heard a little bit of the space to ground chatter earlier. You will hear the call from Capcom, or the capsule communicator here in Mission Control Houston. Actually, it's not here, it's a couple buildings away, but there's a view on your screen. Mission Control Houston, staffed 24/7, always making sure that the astronauts and the crew members living on the International Space Station are safe, and that the station itself is flying as it should be. So we'll hear a call from the Capcom. That's the single person that speaks with the crew throughout the day, walking them through all of their tasks, all of their experiments, and things like that.
Houston, are you ready for ready for the event.
Houston Station, we are ready for the event.
We are ready for the event. NASA Communications, this is Mission Control Houston. Please call station for a voice check.
Station, this is NASA Communications Leah Cheshire along with your friend Matt Dominic. How do you hear us?
Matt Dominic, how do you hear us?
We hear you loud and clear. How station?
We hear you loud and clear as well. Don, thanks for welcoming us aboard today.
Don, so good to see you. I left 90 or so days ago, 100 days ago. Good to see you back at the cupola.
Matthew, it almost seems like it was eons ago that we were up here together.
It does. Like, there's been so much that happened. I've been spending a lot of time adapting back to life in 1G. It's terrible. Heads up. 0G is much more entertaining. But I'm curious about what you've been working on. You and I would, you would get up early in the morning. I was a bit of a night owl, and we would kind of meet in the middle of the day and see what we were doing in kind of our personal time with science. What have you been up to lately?
Oh man, you saw some of the stuff that I brought up in my personal kit in terms of special filters, solar filters, and then the tracking mechanisms, and now getting nadir views of thunderstorms looking down, which is a view that's really hard to get if you are living on Earth, and recording sprites and blue jets.
When you and I were on board, we were shooting thousands and thousands of images trying to capture red sprites. I was aware of that camera feature, but didn't think to use it. You told me a couple weeks ago that you started using the feature on the camera where you can be watching a live view, have the camera locked down, and then you hit the shutter release, and it pulls images from a couple seconds prior, as though you missed that special moment. That's a feature of the camera now with digital cameras. How is that working out?
That's working out really well because I've got it set for a half a second pre-exposure, and I have it set on burst mode. This is the Nikon Z9, and I've got the 200 millimeter f2 lens on, and I'm looking through the wharf window nadir straight down on thunderstorms, and you know how they just go poop, 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 poop. And you can catch these storms. As soon as you see the flash, you mash the button, and then it'll have pre-recorded a half a second before you mash the button, so you can capture the whole thing.
That's awesome intuition. I wouldn't. My instinct is that half a second wouldn't be enough, that maybe you'd want a full second, but I guess that makes sense because I remember shooting thunderstorms, and a lightning strike's a lot longer than you think, and I remember seeing it and then pulling it and not having that half second delay and having some success with it. So half second probably sounds like it works out pretty awesome. Have you gotten some red sprites with that technique?
What I'm finding is the sprites from a nadir view are hard to see even with a 200 millimeter lens, but what I'm catching fairly frequently are blue jets. You'll see the top of a thunderhead, and there'll be a bright blue spot. It almost looks like a laser beam is coming out from somewhere in the thunderhead. It's really interesting, and you might see that blue spot in one, maybe two sequential frames, and then it goes away, and then sometimes it comes back maybe 30 or 40 frames later. But to see these pink tendrils that you typically think of as sprites, those I haven't gotten confirmed that this is a sprite, but the blue jets, it's obvious when you see a blue jet.
Oh, that's awesome. I need to go dig through the files that you're downlinking to go check that out. What about, you and I talked about, you built that tracker, and you had that tracker, we were going to talk about putting that in the cupola, but I've seen some of your images online where you're doing that in the Dragon with the handrails. How is that? I mean, I've seen some of the pictures, they're awesome. What drove you to go to the Dragon?
Well, two things. One, Oh, actually, I have it set up both places. I could go to the crewed Dragon. It needs to be the Dragon that's on the zenith docking port, so that way the windows look station forward. Or here in the cupola, and what I'm gonna do, and this might be dangerous, I'm gonna pop the camera off its mount, and I'm gonna give you a little look-see here in the cupola. So here is the mount right there, and this is a wind-up mount, and I've got one that runs off of a stepper motor, and then I've got one of my favorite camera lens setups here. This is a 15 millimeter T1.8 lens. Anyway, you could set it up in the cupola, you can set it up in Dragon. The views, as you know, they're similar. They're similar but different.
Oh, absolutely. I love that you set up all the cameras for the shot today to demo what we have there in the cupola.
So, Don, tell us a little bit. Imagine somebody is just getting into astrophotography. Do you have any tips or tricks? How did you get into astrophotography yourself, and what are some of the best things that you can share with somebody aspiring to do that?
The best things that you can share with somebody aspiring to do that.
Oh, you know, I started astrophotography basically with one of these little brown plastic brownie Kodak cameras when I was just a little kid, and it had like a normal shutter speed, and then you could prop the shutter open if you had a piece of tape, and I just mounted on a tripod and pointed up at the sky. So all you need is any form of a camera, and then you need a tripod, and it helps to go to an amateur astronomy meeting someplace, and you'll run across all kinds of people that are there, and I'll get you pointed in the right direction. You don't need expensive equipment, just a small tripod, any kind of camera, and some friends to help give you a few pointers.
I love it. So anybody can make it happen. So I want to talk a little bit about the science that you're doing there, obviously, but also the photography itself is kind of an art. So how do astronauts and engineers really marry those worlds? How do you bring together this intersection between art and science and express your creativity in that way?
I think it just happens naturally. Much of the science we do is observing what happens in nature, and then learning something about it, and then reworking it so that what you've learned applies towards helping human beings. And there's art in that whole process. So you work on doing your science, you work on doing your technology, and then you observe and smell the roses along the way.
I think that's a great point, and Don, I like to think about some of the differences though. At NASA, we are trained specifically to do very technical imagery, right? So if we're supporting a researcher on the ground or an experiment, we go take very precise photos so they can support that science objective, or maybe maintenance on the space station. But if we're doing stuff for art, and Don and I took a lot of pictures for art, right? It's a different look, it's a different capture. Like, do we want to include the window frame in the picture to show that we're on the space station? Do we want to include some part of space station structure? Again, Don, like you can talk to, you tend to put, when you're framing the image, parts of space station structure in the image to show people, hey, where we are, the curvature of the Earth. Like, those are kind of things you don't normally see in images from space, like from a satellite.
Yeah, there's always going to be an artistic aspect of what you do, and we were replacing the urine hose in the toilet. Actually, I did that 2 days ago, and part of that process is this little filter that's very important, but it gets really, really nasty, and you need to take pictures of it. And you can just take an engineering picture of a clogged urine filter, or you can somehow figure out how to make that thing artistic. in terms of its composition. And what I did was, instead of just doing a plain parallel view, I kind of tipped it on the side so that you could see this guck all stuck around on the side of the filter head. And you know, you may not want to hang that in your living room as a piece of framed art, but if you're doing an engineering photograph, try to figure out how to make it into an artful description of whatever it happens to be.
Well, we're watching the chat, and we do have a question about your photography specifically. So CAPTCHA, a lot of numbers, asks, why do you shoot at a higher ISO and f/16 aperture?
Okay, it's always compromises. When I'm shooting daytime, I like f/8 to f/11. And there's always plenty of light so you can shoot there. And I do that because most lenses, you know, somewhere between 5.6, f/8, maybe f/11, that's the sweet spot in the characteristic of the lens where aberrations are minimized, resolution is there. So I like to keep the lenses in that category if I can. And daytime you typically do. And then I adjust the ISO for daytime. For the Nikon Z9, I like to keep it at ISO 500 because that's one of the native ISO settings for that particular sensor. Nighttime is different. At nighttime, particularly for cities at night, because of the orbital motion, I need as fast an ISO as I can, and I'm willing to accept some noise in the final picture so that I can stop the motion and collect the image at night. So it's a compromise. You either have a blurry image or you don't get an image at all, or you get a less than perfect image because you pump the ISO up, and you have to decide what do you want.
Since we're on Twitch, and there's probably some big nerds out there, which I support, I'm one of, just to give you some just numbers for the camera nerds out there. A typical night shot, you know, just basic stuff to account for orbital speed and how dark it is typically about a 1/4 second of an exposure, 6400 ISO, and maybe an f/1.2 or 1.4 if we had the lens. So we have a super fast lens, right, to just be a giant light bucket. But then during the day, right, we go from night to day really fast because we're going so fast around the Earth. At daytime, like Don was talking about, we might be in that, you know, f/5 to f/8, f/11 he talked about, ISO 500 for the camera, and then shutter speeds in the, you know, 1 over a couple thousand, so, you know, 1 over 2,000, 1 over 3,000 to account for that. So that's a huge, like if you roll through the clicks on your camera and go count the number of stops between day and night, it's significant.
So I want to talk for a second about where we see Don in the International Space Station right now. He's in the cupola, which is essentially our big bay window looking down at Earth. It's where you shoot most of your photos. Yep. And we have another question for you, Don, which is from Rudrick Ice asks, have you guys seen a comet pass by from the International Space Station? I know the answer.
Go ahead, Don.
Go ahead, Don.
Pojo, Matthew, I knew I was going to make that slip. We're not supposed to use call signs in our PAO events. So Matthew, we were lucky enough to be on orbit during a comet. It was 2024, I think Alpha 3 was the comet. And now there's another comet. So during this mission, there's been 2 comets that we've been able to see and photograph. And I love the way, Matthew, how you figured out from geometry where to point the lens in order to get first view of the early comet.
Don, I am so jealous that you're able to say, well, that was the first comet in the mission, and now I'm on the second comet. Like, how do you go to space and get 2 comets, Don? You're super lucky up there. What a deal. That's ridiculous. But Don and I had a blast shooting the comet. We were shooting it both for an artistic perspective, but then also pushing the imagery down to Earth for scientists to go through and look at it, because we had a very unique position on the space station to be able to take this imagery as it came up over the horizon. One of my favorite parts about it is you could see the atmosphere refracting the light kind of like a lens, and so as the comet comes up, you can see the tail of the comet refracted in the atmosphere, which was awesome. But super jealous, Don, that you got to go and get a second comment. So lucky.
So we have a question from Kay Breeze, 3rd grade class. This one's a little more general space. So when you get back from space, how do you feel? Don, I know you have this experience, and Matt, now you have this experience, so I'd love to hear from both of you.
Okay, I don't feel very good when I get welcomed back to Mother Earth. It takes about 12 hours, maybe a day before I stop having stomach awareness. That's a polite way of saying that you're puking your guts out. And after the stomach awareness, I'm a little wobbly for another couple of days, and then after that, if you saw me walking down the street, you probably wouldn't know that I'd been off the planet, although there's still plenty of other things going on inside that can take weeks, if not months, to get back to normal. Matthew, what was your experience?
Oh man, coming back to Earth was rough. I really wanted to be back up there with you guys. Obviously, I wanted to be with my family and friends, but you know, Don, you were my mentor for so long, and you never told me that how bad it would be to just sit down. Like your backside is so used to sitting on Earth. We're Leah and I are doing that right now. But I didn't sit for 8 months, and I guess your body just gets accustomed to not sitting, and I couldn't sit in a chair for more than a couple of minutes without feeling sore. And then a lot of the research we do, they ask us to get on a bike and pedal for research. And the bike seats are the most excruciatingly painful things to sit on, at least for me. My stomach also did not agree with me. We're scrolling through the chat here, and I just saw a chat about 3D printing stuff for our cameras. We have 3D printed kind of, bumpers for our lenses so they don't scratch the windows. But, we also 3D printed some stuff before flight to launch. We 3D printed an adapter, not necessarily for the camera, but for a demo. We wanted to connect 2 water bottles together. And so we were doing some demos with propellant transfer. So we 3D printed some parts for that. And there's 3D printers on space station, both on the USOS side and our Russian cosmonaut side.
Reward on the Twitch stream, and it's waiting for redemption. So so let us know. We will see if it gets redeemed, and we might have Dawn do something special. But in the meantime, let's see what other questions we're getting in for Dawn. For Scripty Shake asks, thoughts on computational physics, and is this skill useful for experiments in space?
That's yours, Dawn. You're the physicist.
That's yours, John. You're the physicist.
Oh, hold on. What? Say again that question.
They're asking about the value of computational physics in space. It's a detailed question. I think the answer should be something along the lines of, we are so thankful that lots of scientists at NASA do that for us before we get up there. Dawn and I's experience on space station is mainly operational in nature, right? We're operating their experiments. We're helping the researchers do that. We have a cold atom lab up there, I think on the port side of the lab, doing some experiments. But we're enabling the experiments by setting them up. But the actual physics and computation is done by folks on the Earth.
And I have one more thing. Let's see, we're about to run out of time with Dawn. We might have time for one more question, but we did get that channel point redemption from Ash. So Dawn, if you have a special microgravity demonstration to show us in space, we would love to see it.
I came prepared with a microgravity demonstration. And what I want to show you, watch closely. So right now I've got my hat on like this, bill forward. That means I'm Don Pettit. Now I'm Matthew Dominic, and we have this kind of conversation. Matthew would say, Don, what's the native ISO that you want to run on your camera? Well, I think we should keep it around 6400. But one of the native ISOs is more like 500. Well, we have to figure out whether we could get the imagery we want at 500 versus 6400. So that's my microgravity a demonstration of what happens when you get two uber geeks in space at the same time talking about imagery.
I regret so much not bringing my hat into the studio in here. Don and I loved wearing hats on orbit, and Don was always giving me trouble on orbit because I was flying around with my hat backwards and Don had his hat on forwards, and we were always nerding out, and the people around us were just rolling their eyes like, what are these two dudes doing? But Don, I appreciate the impression from the cupola.
I don't know if we can recover after that. So, thank you so much, Don, for speaking with us today. That was really amazing, really incredible, and we really appreciate all of the insight into photography, into research, and your impression of you and Matt's conversation. So, thank you again, Don. We can't wait to talk to you again soon.
Hey, a quick question. Do I have time for a real physics demonstration?
Do it.
I have a yo-yo here. Look at this. It's a yo-yo that a friend of mine made, and I'm gonna.
Oh, so on the space station we have antennas that point up. It's kind of weird. The first time I saw a model of the space station, there's antennas that pointed up, and I was like, what, we're pointing up? Yeah. So the way the space station communicates with folks on Earth is it has antennas that point up that go to something called a TDRS satellite, and then beam back down to Earth. And so right now we just lost that. We're switching between one satellite to another. As the space station goes around Earth, it points at different TDRS satellites. So we just lost. We missed the yo-yo demonstration. Yo-yos are a lot of fun on orbit, but I appreciate the. What would you call it? The impression. The impression of me, which was hilarious. Thank you, Don.
Can you do an impression of Don?
Can I do it? Don is a very difficult person to do an impression of. I'll have to think about that one over the next 20 minutes or so. But I used to do impressions of Bush. Bush is a very easy astronaut to do impressions of. In fact, many times Houston would call space station, and Bush would be off camera, so I would also be off camera, but I would answer as Bush. And Houston didn't know that it was me calling back. So I would do my Bush impression to imitate Bush all the time.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yeah,
okay. I might have to hear that later, too. So for everyone, we are going to try and get that video of Don doing that actual demonstration with the yo-yo. Hopefully we'll post that on social media later. Obviously, you can find us at NASA. You can find Don on astro_pettit, I believe, but also, of course, NASA astronauts. We're all over the place, so you'll be able to find us if you're looking for us. But we are sticking around for a little while to answer some more of your questions, just to talk about everything space station, Matt's mission. We'll talk some more about science and astrophotography. So where do you want to start? I'm going to let you
it's
take
all
the
over the
lead for a
board.
second.
I'm trying. Twitch is flying here, seeing all kinds of questions pop up. I can talk a little bit about what it was like to fly with Don in space, or others. We had a total blast up there all the time. We're working on the space station. You have a full workday of experiments. You have time to work out about 2.5 hours or so, but then you have free time. And so, on Earth, your free time on Earth from a workday or doing all those kinds of things gets consumed with stuff like a commute, right? Sleeping, right? Going to the grocery store, like doing your administrative things. What's nice about the space station is you don't have to go to the grocery store. The food's already prepackaged. Food prep is simple, right? So you save all of this time on space station that you would burn on Earth, right? So you get time to do, stuff in your free time. And so Don and I would, he was making fun of one of our typical conversations where he and I in our free time would be nerding out about camera settings or quickly like doing some internet searches to try and figure out why the camera's behaving in a certain way, or asking experts on Earth how the camera works and how to take better shots. And so, but Don and I kind of sleep shifted a little bit, such that I would stay up late and be taking images, like specifically when the comet was up. I would be taking pictures of the comet late at night because we would see it every 90 minutes. We're going around the Earth so fast, you get a chance to take a picture of the comet every 90 minutes instead of waiting, once a night. We get it a lot. And then Don would be getting up early in the morning. And so we had like a narrow window where he and I were both awake at the same time to nerd out together. But then that way we were maximizing window time.
Well, speaking of your photography, Terminals has a question asking, how do you decide which moments or phenomena to capture, and what role do you think visual storytelling plays in bridging the gap between space exploration and public inspiration? That's a good question.
That's a really good question. Yeah. Okay, so there's a lot packed in here. So where do you decide to take pictures? So one, we are formally trained in technical engineering imagery to support research on the ground. You know, scientists launched an experiment. We need to be able to take a good picture of that to support that data. So hey, we want to take a picture of plant growth. So a technical image might be having a ruler or a measurement device specifically next to the plant, and it's positioned perfectly so that you're 90 degrees off, orthogonal, so they can get accurate plant measurements, right? So that is almost pure engineering, no art, or pure science, not art. But then in your free time, you know, I feel pretty lucky. I kind of feel like Willy Wonka, right? The movie, like I got this golden ticket in my chocolate bar, and I got to go to space, right? And so I kind of feel an obligation to tell everybody, wow, it's really amazing there, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you're the inside the chocolate factory. You would go tell all your friends, right? So I feel like an obligation to take lots of images and share what space is like with everyone. So that's like what drives what pictures I take, like what captures life. So we took imagery inside the space station to show what it's like to live there. We do demos on space station to kind of show kind of what it's like to live and play, right? You know, what it's like to translate or move around the space station. We kind of did like a parody video of the Olympics where we floated around and had a good time doing that. That's worth looking up on the internet, but that was just us, you know, playing games in zero G to kind of show what the lighthearted side of the space station is like. And then there's some more parts to this question here.
Let's see.
So
right here.
Picking the windows, I'm looking at where the space station is, where the lighting is, what are the, do we have a comet? Do we have a sunrise? Do we have the moon? Like what's available? Which way does the window point, right? And actually they're just showing right now on the live stream, I think. I don't know if they're showing that live, but there's a picture looking out the service module. This is aft in the Russian segment looking out their airlock, what they use for spacewalks. And this is, I think a moderately long exposure shot, but to capture the aurora, the blue reflecting off the Russian solar arrays, and then it's a long enough exposure and a high enough ISO that we can capture the galaxies, right, and the Milky Way. So, not the galaxies, just the straight Milky Way. So that choice is done artistically. And I think that covers it, right, the public inspiration part.
Yeah, that was a great question. Thank you for asking that. We're still monitoring the chat, so pop your questions in. We're going to get as many as we can. But I wanted to bring up something that you touched on really quickly, which was plants and taking photos of plants. So we do plant research on the International Space Station, which is fascinating when you think about it, because number one, I'm not good at growing plants on the Earth. I'm just going to come out and say it and put it on the record. I'm not. But when you go to space, you have to think through a lot more things that you don't have to here when you're thinking about sun exposure, and you're thinking, how do you even water this? You can't just pour water on it. Water just floats right off. And so I would love to hear about your space farming experiences and how you think that helps, translate to growing plants on Earth.
So I think in some aspects, it's research plants, and so it's easier, very controlled. I'll make fun of myself a little bit. My daughter came home with a cabbage. She's supposed to grow a cabbage, right? And I can't remember what grade they give out cabbages.
Oh, cute.
Right, and so, it was early winter time. It was like, I don't know, it was like a January, February time where they give these kids these cabbages. And so growing cabbages in controlled environments makes life easier, right? So we over-engineered it. We went and got grow lights, and we were putting like 18 hours of sunlight on this thing artificially, and this cabbage grew huge really fast because it had some support. Same thing on space station. We have grow lights. We can change how long the light is there. We can change the food medium, right? I remember one of the experiments I was injecting the nutrients into the soil with a syringe, right, to keep it contained. You take advantage of physics, right? So we have surface tension. So you can use surface tension to kind of keep the water contained inside a vessel and not leak out, but still be able to give nutrients to the plant. So in some respects, it's a lot easier because it's controlled. But they might be looking at things like, how does the plant know which way to grow, right?
You mentioned surface tension, and that brought to mind, I saw it making the rounds the other day again. Don actually developed a coffee cup that you can drink from in space that uses surface tension. Because in space, you have to drink from a drink bag, essentially. The fluid doesn't stay in a container necessarily, and then when you tip it up, it doesn't really necessarily go down. So I just thought that was so funny, and if you follow Don, or if you go search space coffee cup, you will definitely find it. It's fascinating.
It's a really, he had some very clear requirements in designing that cup. Like he and I both love coffee. He and I both drink black coffee. We love, and part of drinking coffee is how the smell gets into your nose. Yeah. Right? And so when you're drinking from a drink bag, you're missing that part, right? When you consume food, the smell is almost as important as the taste. And so with coffee, Don wanted to have that experience of when you pick up a coffee mug on Earth, you get the aroma. And so on space, it's a drink straw. So he looked at something called the wetting angle, and he looked at the wetting angle between the ceramic or the plastic and the fluid, and designed an optimal shape to guide the coffee to your lips, but also have the ability to put your nose into the cup and smell the coffee.
Was that a science of opportunity experiment, or was that something assigned? It was something that he just really dreamed up, right?
Yeah, so he used some of the stuff that was available on the space station to experiment with a couple shapes. I think it was one of his early expeditions, and then he later, kind of did a proof of concept on orbit, just using stuff available on the space station, if my story understanding the story is correct. And then he came back to Earth and then designed the actual three-dimensional cup and made it, and then launched a few of us took them with us. Like I took one up there, and others have taken many of the cups up there, and we used them on orbit. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, science of opportunity, can you break down what that means? I mean, I think it's kind of self-explanatory. It's in the name. It's in the name, but did you have any chances to do any science that wasn't necessarily on your timeline that you really wanted to dive into?
Sure. So we get the opportunity to take up like a couple of things with us, right? And I brought some things for my kids, but just stuff that kind of helps with your mental health and just things to do. And like you saw that Don brought a yo-yo. Yo-yos are fun in orbit, and some of them are science, but most of them are mainly demos, right? And so I think Don coined the term science of opportunity, but it's just using stuff that's available to do quick science experiments. Like one time we were using this really, really cold brick that was in it was like a minus 100, I don't know what it was, minus 150 degrees centigrade or something. It was very, very cold brick on space station that was used to cool something down, but then before we put the brick away, we had this really, really cold brick. And so what do you do with that? So we called it science of opportunity. We had some special time, like we put water on it to watch how water freezes in 0G. It's different, right? Or how crystals form. You can see the crystals forming in a 0G environment. And so we just kind of do the science of opportunity. We make a video, and then maybe we, at some point, like I still have some videos. In fact, Don and I did some science of opportunity when I was up there, just thinking about how you transfer rocket fuel from one spaceship to another.
Oh yeah. And
so Don and I, built a couple setups for that, and then played with it. So actually, we posted that this morning on social media. Just let's go see about this. Let's communicate this, and maybe we enlighten some engineer on Earth who sees, oh wait, that's how fluids behave.
Yeah.
Maybe we could do something this way. And we're not doing like some of it's science, right? But it really is demonstrations to get people thinking and inspire folks to come join aerospace, come join us at NASA.
Right, because that's a problem that we're going to have to be thinking about solving when we go to the moon with
Yeah.
Artemis, when we go to Mars.
Exactly.
In-space propellant from ship to ship.
And we do it currently.
Yeah.
So like the Progress launches,
Right.
and it docks with space station, and it transfers fuel.
Right.
It's not a cryogenic fuel. We've done it small scale, but we're looking for Artemis to go do this with cryogenic fuel, cold liquid fuels, and transfer them to go to the moon.
So we're getting some really good questions in the chat. This one from Dustin. How do you perform the same tests in zero gravity with things like medical tests that you need gravity and function to perform? Also, for the fun of it, what is your favorite sci-fi book? But the medical ones. So you guys do a ton of medical research, like
Yep.
we've been talking about, but you have baseline data that you take here on Earth before and after your mission, things like blood draws, and even weighing yourself in space. So can you give us a breakdown of how that works without gravity?
So sometimes gravity helps.
Yeah.
And sometimes gravity doesn't. And so we just take advantage of what we have and make it work. I think about things differently, having been in 0G. Like something as simple as the latch on your fence. Like if you have a fence, right? It's like a wedge, and the wedge drives up, and then when it gets over, gravity drops it in place, right? So
Right.
on Earth, gravity's awesome. Drops that wedge down, gate's locked. It doesn't work. You can't open the gate. In space, you have to compensate for that by maybe adding a spring, right? Now some latches on Earth have springs just for that purpose, but on space, you have to add that force since it's not there. Or other times, it's helpful. For example, there's a lot of things that happen to your eyeballs in 0G because the fluids come up in your body because they're not held on by gravity, and your eyes swell. And so we do a lot of ultrasounds of our eyeballs, right? Or we ultrasound our body. On Earth, you use ultrasound gel. Right?
Yeah.
Because on Earth, if you were to put, gel on yourself, you need it to stick, have
Right.
more surface tension, sticky. So when you go get an ultrasound, they put gel on. In space, we don't need gel. We don't need it. We just use water. Because there's no
yeah.
gravity, right?
It's not gonna roll
so
right
it
off.
just doesn't roll right off.
Yeah.
It just sticks to you and stays there with surface tension. So you just use water in space for an ultrasound, right? So when I ultrasound my heart, or we do this really weird thing where I fill up my eye socket with water and then I ultrasound my eye with water, it works great. So sometimes it helps. Sometimes it's a pain.
Ultrasounding your eye with water. Wow.
It's kind of fun. You put this big globule of water on there. You've got a remote guider, we call on Earth, somebody telling you, hey, turn the probe this way, put it that way. And then you can see the ultrasound screen, so you close the eye that's being ultrasounded, and with the other good eye, you watch the screen and guide it. And you can see your lens, and you can see the whole inside of your eyeball. It's awesome.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
Not to miss the second half of the question. Do you have a favorite sci-fi book?
I don't do fiction.
That's okay.
Life is crazy enough. I don't need extra fiction in my life.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember if I have one. There was one I read several years ago about Jupiter, and I'm not going to remember it right now. But
Sorry to disappoint. I'm just not a sci-fi person.
It's okay. It's okay. Another good question from Mondo Blasto. How has 3D printing changed missions, especially with printers in the station?
So I'm a little bit of in my free time, I'm a 3D printing nerd.
Yeah.
I spend a lot of time designing stuff for a 3D printer, and then also we have it on orbit. So this is very interesting to me. So common 3D printing on Earth, there's lots of different types like SLS and whatever, but the one that people are most familiar with is called fused deposition modeling, which is the classic piece of plastic that's being laid down in layers. And so if you were to build, let's say, a bridge like this in 3D printing, right, and this is an air gap, when the printer goes across with the plastic, it would just fall down without some sort of support to hold the plastic up. And so on Earth, you design these like support structures, and hopefully they break away cleanly, but it's kind of a pain to engineer for that and design for that. So in space, gravity doesn't cause the plastic to fall, and so you can print without support, which is super fascinating. And so when we were up there, we were printing cardiac tissue. So we had a printer that was printing cardiac tissue, and you didn't have to deal with the complexities of supports that you wouldn't imagine, like wanting to break away stuff off your newly made heart.
Right.
So we were printing cardiac tissue. It's fascinating.
Wow. So, I mean, I feel like one of those things that we can't do here on Earth necessarily, right?
That's the idea, yeah.
It's enabled by microgravity. That's fascinating. Let's see. Tech demonstrations, another thing I wanted to touch on. So you are like the I'm losing my mind. I'm not losing my mind. I'm losing my words. So you are essentially the handyman when you're on the International Space Station, and that is not the connection I was trying to make in my mind. But
okay.
Tech demonstrations. We have what is an advanced potable water system.
Yeah.
And break it down for me. Break it down, because I think this one is such a good real life application. I want people to understand how this is being worked on the International Space Station. Yes, it helps us prepare for future missions, but it's also very applicable to life on Earth too.
Water, man, what would we do without water? Water is such this crazy, awesome fluid. I mean, you could just have a whole conference on water, right? Like water expands when it freezes, which is why ice floats, right? That's not a common property of things. This is unique. I think there's some other fluids that do it. It's super heavy. It's dense, right? It takes like something like 4 joules. There's just so many cool parts about water that like bring life to the solar system. But the water on space station, because it's heavy, we don't want to launch it, right? Like every kilogram you launch to orbit, you have to have rocket propellant to lift it. And so that just isn't efficient. And so if you're going to keep people in space for 25 years like we have on the space station, you want to reuse your water. And so to steal Don's phrase, like Don's been saying this for years, is like today's coffee is tomorrow's coffee, right? So we use our restroom facilities on the space station, but we immediately separate out the fluid and it becomes tomorrow's coffee, right? Meaning like we filter it, we store it, we pump it around with pumps, we clean it. What is the name of I can't remember the name of the device that filters it. But then we're left with this very thick sludge we call brine, right? But there's still a little bit of water in there, right? So we actually put it in a special bag that goes on the space station, and we run hot air over it and slowly we pump that, get that last little bit of moisture out, and we push that moist air into the atmosphere of the space station. And so if you have an air conditioner at your house, you know that there's like that little water that drips out, right? Yeah. So any moisture we expel, like when you breathe out, you're breathing out moisture that you drink water, it's in your system, it comes out through your lungs, that goes into the air, makes, when we work out, the sweat goes into the air. We can't let that water go away. So it goes into our space station air conditioning system. And that water that would normally drip out the side of your air conditioner at your house and just go outside,
you catch it.
We save it.
Yeah.
And so that hot air that blows over the brine, that goes into the atmosphere of the space station. It smells a little funny, like the little port where that comes out.
Oh, okay.
You don't really hang out there very long. It smells like hot urine.
Oh, okay.
It's not
I'll
the
remember
greatest.
that for my future unplanned trip.
Yeah, well, if you go to the space station, if you go to a space station, don't hang out where the brine odor comes out.
Cool.
It's right next to where you work out, at least for our space station.
Okay.
Don't hang out there very long. But then that moist air goes into the air, the air conditioners capture it, and then we repump that in and filter it and drink it.
Okay.
So we would capture something, over 90% of our water is retained.
Well, we had a question come in really while you were talking about that from Isaiah asking, how is the research conducted on the International Space Station influencing the development of technologies and solutions for sustainable living on Earth? And I feel like that is the connection I wanted to make. Because, well, that potable water system allows us to reclaim the water from, like you were saying, your urine. I mean, that is not something that we typically consider a clean water source. It's not. And so there are a lot of places on Earth that don't have access, like readily available access to clean water sources. And so by testing out something where you're able to recycle what percentage of the water?
It's over 90.
Yeah, over 90% of that water and reuse it and continue to reuse it. I feel like it's one of those direct applications of how we can be more sustainable here on Earth and also help communities that don't have access to things like fresh water.
I'm pretty sure the city of Houston recycles all of its water.
Really?
Yeah. So all the water that goes down the drain here in Houston gets recycled and used again. It's get cleaned. We don't have a fresh water source here in Houston.
Oh, I need to read up a little bit more on that
You may not want
process.
to know.
I'm not from here originally, so.
Me neither, but there are lots of cities around the world that have to clean their water and reuse it again.
Do you have any other developments or tech solutions that you think help us be more sustainable?
Yeah, so I mean, everything is constantly about testing. Like, how do we use less packaging, right?
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of like going camping. The first time you go, the first time you go camping, you bring too much stuff, right?
Yeah, it's true.
Like it's glamping. Like, what is all this stuff? I really want to carry
you're
this,
right.
You bring too much stuff the first time you go camping, and then the next time you like whittle it down, and then there's like these folks that are extreme campers or extreme backpackers that are trying to save every little ounce, and they take their toothbrush but they cut off the handle, right? Because they don't want to carry on that piece of mass, right?
I didn't know it was that extreme.
Right, there's extreme everything, but this is Twitch. We're gonna have everything on there. But like you start really whittling down that mass, and so going to the space station is kind of like glamping. We're living in a place that is the interior of like a 5-bedroom house.
Yeah.
We've got all kinds of supplies. We have food, right? We had 2 extra guests for months that we didn't plan for, but we had plenty of food. We didn't have any resource issues. Just we added 2 people to our glamping, no big deal. We're fine. We were totally fine. Lots of food, lots of water, right? Think about it that way. If you were to just add 2 people on a lunar mission or a Martian mission, that's a big deal now. You're seriously resource constrained. And so we gotta go from a glamping mindset to like base camp of Everest mindset, where we're cutting off the bottom of our toothbrush because we don't need the handle.
That's a lot.
Yeah. So everything we practice in the space station, like how do we use less paper? How do we use less plastic? How do we use less packaging?
Oh, let's see. A lot of good questions coming in from everyone. Thank you all so much. This one's cool. Amazing Cami asks, after spending months in space, can you spot exactly where you are by looking down, or do you still need to look at some kind of map? Yes.
So we're so lucky for so many reasons, but we had the place that we worked out, right? Like, there are very few people on Earth that like setups. Like, setups are awful. I think there's some people that like setups, but I don't like
It's not me.
I don't like doing setups. But when we would do sit-ups, every time you would sit up, you would get a face full of Earth, and then you'd sit back down. So the best possible place to do sit-ups is the space station.
Immediate reward.
Immediate, like you sit up with this resistance, and then you get this view of Earth. And so I think I got to the point where, Laurel, my crewmate, kind of mentioned you could do this, and many people get the point where you're looking out that window so often, you can kind of know where you are based upon kind of the color, the tint, like the tint or the hues of the Earth. Right? Like, oh, that's definitely South America, or that's definitely southern part of Africa, just from the color. So that's definitely some Saharan color. It's very clear.
I feel like expert level would be, can you do it at night based on the city lights?
Yes.
Can you do it at night?
Yes. Southeast Asia fishing boats, when you start seeing certain colors where they have the lights in the water to attract certain types of fish, I think, like it's very clear. That's Southeast Asia.
I think Don just posted a picture of that.
Southeast Asia fishing boats are amazing.
That was really cool.
There's stuff all over, and you're like, oh yeah, that's Europe.
Okay, I have a question for you.
Uh-oh.
This one's from Leah Cheshire. What's one thing that you wish people knew about being an astronaut that you don't think they that you don't think they know?
One thing? You're limiting me to one thing?
I mean, you can give me a few.
I think it's well known, but maybe it just needs to be better. Like folks, like we get put up on this like pedestal that we like know a whole bunch of stuff, and we don't, right? It's very much when we go to the space station, we're technicians and operators. So most of the science, like almost all of the science we do, is developed by incredible people on Earth.
Yeah. They
design the experiments. They launch it. Oftentimes, I've never seen it before. Like I've not seen this experiment before. I'm given a procedure, and my job is to be the eyes and ears for the researcher on the Earth and to give everything I have. Like this person's worked years, or these group of people have worked years to put the space station experiment together. And they get 2 hours of my time for me to make it work, right? And I got to throw everything at it because this is, they've dedicated a huge chunk of their life.
Yeah, no pressure.
But the thing I think that's, to answer your question, is like folks think that we understand those experiments. I don't have a clue. Like a lot of times I have no idea what we're doing. Like I'll read a summary of what the experiment's doing, but I haven't spent years setting up this really detailed experiment.
Sure.
I'm turning bolts, I'm installing it. Like I set up a 3D printer to print cardiac tissue. I have no idea how it works, right? I have a general understanding of what's going on, but I'm the technician that's just putting it together.
Yeah, and it really is a team. I think that you're right. You know, we see a lot of the astronaut photos, we see the astronauts, but we really don't necessarily see the people who come up with the ideas and execute, or you execute them, but that send the research to space and then bring it back home and analyze it. Because for you, it really is, it's that 2 hour block on your timeline. And then you may not see it again. So it comes back down to Earth, or the results of it come back down to Earth, and then the teams here that developed it are the ones who continue working on that.
Yeah, but I think one thing that's common, like maybe you can see it in how Don and I talk, but we're both like super curious humans about the world. And so I think it'd be fun to sit in this like same kind of forum, but have the person who, or group of people that designed that cardiac tissue experiment.
Yeah.
And we could just, I want to ask them 1,000 questions. And sometimes when I'm doing experiments on space station, I get to, they're in my ear in like a headset, and I get to talk to them. And it's super fun, because if we're waiting for the machine to go or do its thing, I'll just start asking questions. I'm like, what is this? How does this work? Tell me so much more, because I have 1,000 questions about what they're doing. But it'd be kind of fun in this kind of forum just to sit down and like, let's just interview these guys. I want to hear how your stuff works.
Wow. Well, thank you for answering my question. This one is from Natha. It says, how do you handle stress and stay focused during long duration space missions? You were up there for about 8 months.
Yeah.
That's long.
It's a marathon.
Yeah.
It's a marathon. You don't sprint.
Okay.
You don't start a marathon by sprinting. You're going to be out of gas. How do you handle stress? We have lots of cool ways to handle stress. For me, like it was taking pictures. It was going to the window and taking pictures, right? That I loved coming up with, you know, hey, how am I going to get this new image? There were times that I think I would take, there were a couple images, I took like 30,000 images just trying to get one of them that was correct. And so that mission for me gave me like a sense of purpose sometimes in my free time to help with like mental health, right? We're really lucky that we have pretty good bandwidth up there now and tablets, so I can video chat with my wife and kids, right? Awesome. Yeah. Like sometimes you want to, like you're dealing with stress, you want to de-stress, just a super fun thing to do is just call somebody on their phone from space station that doesn't expect it. Oh, yeah. Just like a random phone call from space, they think that you're like you're helping them, like it's kind of it's a fun thing for them, and it is, right? Like they're super excited that they just got a call from space, but the thing they don't realize is it's also for me. Yeah. Like hearing that joy in somebody's face, like, oh my gosh, I just got a phone call from space where I'm video chatting, like that's also for me, right? That brings joy to my heart and helps you get through like the stressful day. That's so cool. Yeah. I love that. Well, you can give anybody on the space station my phone number because I would love to receive a phone call from space. Yeah. I know one or two people. Okay. Cool. Yeah, maybe all of them. So we are wrapping up. Sure. I can't believe it's already been an hour that we have talked. I feel like we could stay here for 2, 3, 4. We could. But I really appreciate you coming here today. It was awesome to talk with Don. And I want to leave everybody with some ways you can get involved with NASA. So one of the things is Aurorasaurus. I feel like auroras, I know, I feel like auroras have been honestly more visible than ever lately with different solar storms. And so obviously we see them, they're beautiful, but it really helps scientists help track them if you report your sightings. So each of those reportings is a valuable data point for any of the scientists here on Earth that study auroras and model those. So go look up Aurorasaurus. That is one of our NASA. It is. I love it. I feel like when I was taking, Dawn and I should be like posting from the space station going, we just saw one. Where are you? Yeah. I don't know. We're over Earth. We saw so
So much Aurora.
general, but
Yes.
yeah. So Aurora's ours. We want you to check that out. We also want you to check out Spot the Station. This is one of my favorite things. You can see the International Space Station with your own naked eye, and it is almost unmistakable when you see it. It is, I believe, the third brightest object in the night sky, maybe the second. Spot the Station will have the answer for you on that. So what you can do is you can go input where you are located on Earth, and it'll tell you, it'll give you a heads up. There's an app now you can download. It'll give you a little reminder of when the space station's going to fly over. It'll tell you what direction to look in, and it has a camera feature. You can snap a picture, tell your friends about it, but it's really fun for me. I love to go outside and wave up at the 7 people living and working in low Earth orbit. So check out Spot the Station. Last but not least, Twitch is not the only place where NASA is at. So you can find us on @space_station and @ISS_research on X. You can also follow @NASA astronauts on X, Facebook, Instagram, and you know NASA @NASA is everywhere as well. So make sure that if you're a new follower, if you're getting into the space world, that the conversation just starts here. It doesn't stop here. So really excited that everybody joined us today. And again, thank you, Matt. This has been fun.
Had a blast. Thank you.
Let's do it again.
Please.
Thanks, everyone. We'll talk to you soon.